Well, welcome back to the Tech Talks at VMworld Barcelona 2015. I'm Alastair Cooke, and I'm really pleased to have Scott Lowe join us again. Scott's one of the people who regularly comes and presents some things forward-looking for us. And I asked him if he would please come and spend some time telling us about the things that he's been looking at, the things that based on past history, the things I'm going to be looking at in the future,
Right.
and where to find some more information. So
Sure.
First off, Scott, can I get you to quickly introduce yourself to the lovely people at home?
Yeah, of course. So, hi everyone. My name is Scott Lowe. I work for VMware in the Network and Security Business Unit. That's the team that does NSX. And my role there is to help shape the product for where things are going in the future. So looking at strategic product directions and how things are evolving and what we need to do to the product to make it attractive as things move forward, which is why I spend a lot of time looking at kind of these future-looking things.
Excellent. And just plug your blog as well while we're here, for those who, who aren't familiar.
Yeah. So I do blog, or try to blog regularly at blog.scottlowe.org, and you can also find me on Twitter as @Scott_Lowe.
Great. And one of the things that I do pretty much every year, I think, when I catch up with you at VMworld in San Francisco, is I ask you what you've been looking at and what are the things that have been dominating your interest, not necessarily all in NSX, because
Sure.
that's where the pay comes from, but I know that's not the only thing that is interesting to you as you're studying at the moment. So what are the key areas of technology you've been looking at recently?
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk about how the IT professional, the current way the IT professional is going away, infrastructure is no longer important, all this kind of stuff. And you've heard it, we've been hearing it for years. I think this year does mark a shift in which now there are some very real trends that for folks who've been predominantly focused on being the virtualization admin or the networking admin now need to begin to kind of look a little higher up the stack. And so things are really starting to mature to the point where you can invest some real time there and make some real traction there to, from a career perspective, take yourself from being more just the server gal or guy or the network gal or guy into being, kind of a little more than that, right? And so partly in conjunction with sort of the trends that we see the industry going on, I've been trying to spend some time on these things that are a little farther up the stack. So not just how we put the infrastructure together, which is still important and it's never going to go away, right? But I think the important takeaway for me has been that in addition to putting infrastructure together and making it work, we also need to be looking at how we consume that infrastructure and how we, use the virtual machines that are being provided and the networks that are being created and the storage that is being provisioned. And so that's why I've been spending a lot of time with orchestration tools like OpenStack, developer-centric tools like Docker, spending a little more time with platform as a service, Cloud Foundry. I haven't been able to spend as much time with that as I would like, but it's top of mind for me. And orchestration systems and schedulers like Mesos and Kubernetes.
Right, and one of the things that we're seeing as a trend is this idea that everything is being done by a developer, and the idea of DevOps is that developers are going to take over the operations roles. And one of the perspectives I have is that's absolutely not the case.
Agreed.
The developers have almost no clue about the infrastructure underneath and no care, but that there is a change in what the operations team, the infrastructure team has to do. And that's fundamentally where you're looking, isn't it? At the changes that the infrastructure team needs to make to be relevant in that new world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we can take the messages that DevOps provides, in which you need greater communication and team and sharing between development and operations. And you can look at some of the tools that they've adopted, although I always like to stress anytime we talk about DevOps, it's less about the tools and more about the culture, right? Tools are kind of an outgrowth of the culture. But if you look at some of those tools on how they streamline things for developers, then we can begin to see, okay, if I'm as an IT professional a little more focused on operations, and I want to create this culture of us working together to solve a problem, then I can come a little way and change how I behave and how I offer resources to them to be consumed, and ask them to come a little way and change in the way that how they consume those resources, so we can kind of converge in the middle on some sort of, hopefully happy medium that works with changes on both sides required.
And both sides, quite a lot of the same changes for both sides from what I see, and that I think is a really nice way of building that culture of understanding the changes one another have been through, the things that are important. And I think think that is the key thing, is that bringing together of the cultures, the breaking down of the silos that we saw within infrastructure from virtualization, that DevOps starts to break out another step.
Yeah.
And that infrastructure stuff that was really difficult and required lots and lots of expertise 5-10 years ago is now much easier and doesn't bring nearly as much value. So for us, the specialists, the value, as you say, you've got to move up the stack, you've got to move closer to ultimately the business value being delivered by the applications and the data inside them.
I do think that a lot of us geeks, we love the technology so much, we often lose sight of why the technology exists. Why is it we're building a cloud platform, or why are we putting in virtualization, or why are we putting in an array? And ultimately it's to help support the business objectives. So for us, moving closer to the business, what the business is trying to accomplish, moving up the stack really adds value as individuals, as employees, as lifelong career opportunities, all of that.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to talk about is the places you go to learn these things. Obviously, you've been writing throughout the, I guess, 2 years journey that it's been from you changing across to looking at more Linux and more Open vSwitch and those kinds of things. You've been writing about it, but there is a whole host of other places that the VMware-centric administrator may not be so familiar with. So what are some of the other places you've gone for that information?
So I find that a lot of what I end up finding very useful is tied more on the development side, because a lot of the things that I'm doing, you look at OpenStack, you look at Kubernetes, some of these other projects, they are inherently open source. They were born open source. That's where they grew up and where they're continuing to grow up. And so I actually found myself spending a lot of time on GitHub, which is where these projects, this is kind of evolved as the de facto place where any prominent open source project evolves. And so I would encourage, for more of the VMware-centric folks who maybe haven't gone out to GitHub because maybe you're afraid of what that represents or whatever, it's okay, go ahead and sign up for an account, it'll be all right. And there's a lot of good resources there. Now, there's also a lot of stuff that will distract you, so you got to try and stay focused. But the documentation for these open source projects is getting better. Is also a great opportunity for anybody who wants to get involved in one of these open source projects to get involved, is to help in documentation.
And in particular, as an outsider coming in, the getting started guide, the first use, the how to deploy documentation, that's much easier to write if you don't already know too much about how it works.
That's exactly correct.
That's something that as an infrastructure guy, I could be very valuable to an open source project from.
Yes, extremely. That's an excellent point. I mean, a lot of times the developers get so into and about what they're doing, they're thinking, oh, well, I don't need to write about that because everybody knows
it's obvious.
Yeah, it's obvious. I don't need to cover that. But as a new person coming in, a lot of times we can add real value to projects like that. So I think that's a good point. So GitHub is a great resource. And then other than that, it's just kind of, I would encourage people to kind of step outside their comfort zone on Twitter, right? A lot of times on Twitter, if you're not a Twitter user already, sign up. It doesn't have to be the time suck that everybody describes it to be, right?
Yeah, you don't have to follow all the tweeting celebrities. You can, it can be more professional for you.
And you can be selective about who you follow. You don't have to follow like 1,000 people, right? But one of the things that I see when I talk to a lot of folks is they'll only follow like this, the people kind of inside their circle, so to speak, right? The VMware folks will only follow the VMware folks, and it creates that echo chamber. So try to step outside that and go follow somebody who is, core something in this project where you're trying to get involved in. Like, let's say you want to get more involved in Kubernetes, then you go find resources like Kelsey Hightower, right? Mm-hmm. Or one of the other Kubernetes folks, and just start following them and start seeing who they talk to, start seeing the resources that they recommend. That can be a really, really valuable source of information. And then, depending on the level of time you have and what level of investment you want to do, you can start checking in on the open source meetings that occur on IRC, where they're talking about development plans and what's going on.
That, like getting into GitHub, this is the push the comfort zone, start using something different. So IRC is definitely something different for us in the infrastructure side as well. I was wondering, beyond those two, are there other things that you sort of held back from due to that fear of something new? Fear of something new is not really a Scott Lowe trait. But are there pieces of this journey where you think, I wish I had just sucked it up and gone into that area faster or sooner?
I've been playing with Linux for a long, long time. I just posted a tweet the other week about my first playing with Linux was like 1998. Red Hat 5.2 or maybe even 5.1, right? Before there was Fedora. But it was always kind of a secondary thing. And if I had to go back and look at it, so much of this stuff is being driven by what has evolved out of Linux's journey. I wish I had really invested the resources that I've invested over the last 3 years earlier, rather than waiting until now. And it's one of the reasons why, as I go and I talk to VMugs and other individuals, I say, look, just take the time and do this. There's a whole wealth of additional tools and resources that will kind of naturally come out of that will really set you up fairly well, I believe, for moving into things like OpenStack, Kubernetes, Linux containers, a lot of this stuff.
Because fundamentally, pretty much all of the cloud services, with the exception of Azure, do not run on Windows. They run on a Linux foundation because it's free to release out and free to scale. All of those things we want to do, it just aligns so well with.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And then you're kind of not spending as much time looking at the pure networking piece of your forward-looking thing. You feel that is now actual product that's shipping and is not quite so out in the scary edges?
Well, there's still lots of stuff that we're doing with NSX that is kind of forward-looking, but I can't talk about that stuff just yet. They have to wait for the official announcement at VMworld. But networking at its core is fairly well understood. It's the kind of the stuff at the periphery, the control plane protocols like OpenFlow, which even now is fairly mature but continuing to evolve. I think my interest more on the networking side is more around, and that kind of evolved out of the time spent with DevOps and time spent with Linux and related tools, is more around programmability and automation. Like how do we help the networking professional, right? The guy or gal who has spent their years as a CLI jockey, and now how do we help them sort of move up the stack as well? Like the vSphere and server admins have a fairly kind of clear path. Okay, it went from operating system to hypervisor. We added that, then we added some orchestration management tools, maybe some scripting. Okay, now we're adding additional orchestration tools and schedulers. It's a fairly natural sort of progression, but the idea of programmability and automation on the networking side is really kind of new, right? How do you take a networking admin who may not be familiar with Linux, introduce them to languages like Python and others, get them into the idea of using perhaps a configuration management tool like Ansible or Salt or Puppet to help manage their devices? That's kind of a new thing, and I'm spending a little bit of time in working with some others and things that might help grow that community as well.
Because those network engineers that I've worked with would be terrified of the thought of saying, we're just going to have an automation tool that's going to provision all of the VLANs or VXLAN tunnels that you require. It's you don't need to go and manage that. You're not even going to know how many there are other than from looking at a report, and you will not remember the names of any of them.
Right.
That kind of
you're absolutely right.
comfort.
And I understand where they're coming from. I completely get it, right? I'm not discounting. They have, you look at the traditional network engineer and they have been asked to basically maintain a jigsaw puzzle where
their life has been so hard for so very long.
Because all they get is just this little bitty piece of the overall network, and they have to log into all these different things to see the big picture. So I completely get it, right? But the reality is that just like the person who claims to be just a Windows guy or just a vSphere gal, whatever the case may be, they have to expand to do more. The same is true for networking, right? The networking professionals have to become more than just the CLI router switch jockey. They have to look at how they can streamline their manual processes today and then begin to take on more responsibility. How do I make the network better for this application or that process or that goal?
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I think I've run out of questions because I usually have to go and think for a little while after having a chat with these things about you. I would think about them after I chat with you.
Right.
So are there any other things that we should be thinking about? What else should I be thinking about looking forward as I actually want to retain a career for the next 5 years?
Right. No, I really think that for most of us in the IT space, the big areas of growth for us, and the specific products might change, but the big areas for growth for us are going to be automation, orchestration, these higher level tools that will allow us to kind of be force multipliers for what we're doing, right? So that we're not logging into the same server or the same switch or whatever the case may be, but instead defining a policy or writing a script that does that for us, right? Those are going to be the big things. And so I think for all the folks out there, whether they be storage professionals or virtualization professionals or network professionals, anywhere you can spend time looking at how these automation orchestration tools can kind of multiply your presence in your job are going to be like hugely beneficial. I think that's where we're all going to be pulled.
Cool. Excellent. Well, it's been great chatting with you, as it always is.
Thanks, sir.
And you'll be back on with another presentation in a little while.
Yep.
And in between time, there'll be lots more things happening here at VMworld.
Okay.
So thank
Awesome.
you very much for joining me, Scott.
Thanks, Alastair.